One of the reasons why I enjoy Star Wars is that there are many aspects of it that can translate to the real world. I often think about what George Lucas may have based some of his ideas off of that existed in our own world when creating Star Wars. Recently I was thinking about the Sith Empire, specifically Emperor Palpatine's Galactic Empire, and how it may relate to the ancient philosophy of Chinese legalism that was predominantly around during the Qin dynasty. This video is going to briefly cover Chinese legalism as a brief introduction to those who may not be familiar with it. Then I will spend some time analyzing Chinese legalism and the Galactic Empire to demonstrate the similarities between the two. By no means are they identical, but I did find there were a few aspects that definitely correlate. So, Chinese legalism, what is it? The person who created it was Han Feizu, and this was approximately 300 years before Christ. So Han Feizu's legalism, what were the main ideas? Well, there are three main principles to legalism: Shi, Shu, and Fa. I will go into those in detail in a moment, but first for the overview. Legalism's main principle is the belief that humans are inherently selfish, evil beings, and that they don't know what's best for them. They require a strong state, and more importantly, a strong ruler to control the people and discipline them through a system of reward and punishment. Now, the clashing mythology of the time was Confucianism, which, among other things, said that a ruler's divine right to rule can be voided if that ruler misbehaves, or voids the divine right to rule. This was in strong contrast to legalism, which stated that the ruler's position was absolutely authoritarian, and it was not so much the individual that carried the charisma and the power, but more so the position of power. Military strength was valued above all else. The strength of the state was valued above all else. Individualism was not favored, and it called for the complete submission of the individual to the state. Maintaining order above all else was imperative. Now, the three components of legalism: Shi, Fa, and Shu. We'll start with Fa. Fa basically meant law or principle, and it stated that, quote, the law code must be clearly written and made public. All people under the ruler were equal before the law. Law should reward those who obey them and severely punish those who dare to speak against them or break them, guaranteeing that the actions taken are systematically predictable. The system of law runs the state rather than the ruler himself. If the law is successfully enforced, even a weak ruler will be strong. Shu meant method, tactic, or art. A bureaucratic administration under the control of the ruler enforces the laws and performs the task of running the state. The ruler employs special techniques to ensure the administrators carry out their duties and do not abuse their positions. The emperor maintains a balance of power by remaining aloof and concealing his personal intentions, so that the laws remain the primary model of behavior. Shi, legitimacy, power, or charisma. It is the position of the ruler, not the ruler himself, that holds power and authority. A ruler should practice non-action, emptiness, and acquiescence in order to allow the natural order of things to rule. In brief, Fa refers to the rule of law, that order can only be maintained through a strict set of laws. Shu refers to the methods of the ruler, and that the day-to-day tasks and running of the state is left to the bureaucratic administration, not the ruler himself. And then Shi, the idea that the position of ruler, not the ruler himself, is what controls the state, and that the ruler should not rule through charisma. In other words, the ruler should not have much of a public life. So we will now look at the Galactic Empire and see in what ways does legalism apply. Shi, Emperor Palpatine. What do we know about Lord Sidious? Well, if you remember, Lord Sidious was never really a ruler who appeared much in the public life. Even if you look at the original trilogy, it was always Vader who was seen as face of the Empire and Emperor. Emperor Palpatine himself rarely made public appearances, and when he did, it was for due reason, or because his subordinates were proving to be incapable. Emperor Palpatine, in a way, played a different role than the Chancellor Palpatine during the Clone Wars era. Much of his time was spent alone, or with advisors, but like I said, his public life was relatively discreet, and it was through Vader. In short, Palpatine did not rule by charisma. However, the source of authority, if you look in the trilogies, the original trilogy, whenever Vader would tell his incompetent subordinates, for example, the Emperor is not as forgiving as I am, the Emperor will not tolerate this, etc., he never refers to Palpatine himself. It's always the Emperor, the position of Emperor, not Palpatine himself. And it is in this way that I believe that the Galactic Empire mirrors at least the Shi component of Chinese legalism. The second component, Imperial law, Fa. Now, if we look at the second component, Fa, this is concerning the rule of law. And I think it's pretty easy to see here why the Galactic Empire mirrors legalism in this sense. We all know the Galactic Empire relied on a very strict rule of laws. There were strict rules and correspondingly strict punishments. This is seen throughout Star Wars, through the original trilogies, through any of the books, novels, you name it, you'll see it. Citizens of the Empire did not live through arbitrary punishments. Everything was spelled out fairly clearly, and the rules were strict, they were harsh. Strict punishments if they weren't followed. Citizens were expected to obey them to a T. All sorts of requirements, regulations. I think it's pretty safe to say the average person will understand how Fa was applied in the Galactic Empire. Now the third component, Shu. This refers to the administrative techniques of either empire. Now, again, Shu refers to the idea that the day-to-day runnings of the empire is not left to the emperor himself, but rather his ministers. Or in the Galactic Empire's case, Palpatine is not running the government day to day. That is left to the governors of planets, such as Tarkin. Local governors on planets, or Tarkin. Emperor Palpatine had at hand many imperial ministers. He had both his advisors, he had Tarkin, he had Thrawn, he had various other governors of systems who carried out the day-to-day runnings of the empire. Palpatine himself never really did this, and with good reason, of course. The imperial hierarchy, Tarkin, Thrawn, Vader, all these governors, they were the ones who were responsible for the day-to-day rule. They were the ones who implemented the punishment and reward system. Palpatine realized that a wide net would be stronger than one individual or one centralized power trying to control the entire galaxy. By breaking his power groups, it's Vader, Thrawn, Tarkin, etc., this allowed for the most efficient administration of the empire. So in brief, legalism is based off of Shi, Fa, and Shu. Those are its three main principles. It believes in the idea that humans are intrinsically evil. Now, on that point, I don't have any solid evidence to back this up. However, we know Sidious is a Sith, and the Sith code is based off the idea that humans need to struggle for power, and that only the strongest shall rule. Whether or not it specifically says humans are evil is unknown. In my personal opinion, I don't believe that Sith believe in either good or evil, only those who have power. So in that regard, the Sith rule and legalism are somewhat ambiguous. Military rule was valued above all else. At this point, I believe the two are similar. We know how extensive the military was in the Galactic Empire. That was where most of the resources were put, and Palpatine believed in rule by iron fist. In that regard, the two are very, very similar. Legalism also believed in anti-intellectualism and anti-welfare state, believing that the welfare state encouraged people to be lazy and not contribute to the strength of the state. Anti-intellectualism, because that was somewhat of a threat towards the rule of the emperor. Again, in Star Wars, these are two somewhat ambiguous areas. I'm not sure what the extent was of the welfare state by the Galactic Empire. Similarly, anti-intellectualism, I do not believe it was promoted nor suppressed. But at the end of the day, Shi, Shu, and Fa, all three of those components, the main elements of legalism, are present in the Galactic Empire. And for that reason, I believe it's safe to say that legalism is probably the closest thing to what Emperor Palpatine was trying to put in place with his Galactic Empire.